a few things to say, kind of to set the scene about kind of the political situation in Italy. I think you guys know, but there's a far-right government in Italy led by Giorgia Meloni, and that's now been in power for 3 years. And I think one of the one of the particularities of this government is that it's I think the most stable government I've seen in my lifetime. I think anyone who has followed Italian politics, since the early 2000s, there's kind of like this running gag of governments, falling every few months and snap elections being called, and the Italian kind of parliamentary system is characterized a lot by this constant instability. And so this changed 3 years ago when Giorgia Meloni came into power, and she's at the head of this coalition of the three main parties that kind of go from the center right to the far right, and she leads the biggest party, which is Fratelli d'Italia, which is a party that has its roots in post-fascist reconstruction. Its founders were part were key actors in Italian fascism, and that after the end of fascism at the end of the Second World War started this party, and Meloni now heads it. And so I think the stability is marked both from a stability kind of like at the top of the regime, where there's no real opposition in parliament. And I think we can come back to this in the discussion, but like the center left party, the Democratic Party, and all other kind of like institutional parties have not been able to mount any real form of opposition. Meloni's popularity has actually risen in the polls since she's come into power, which, I mean, you guys know this in the UK. I know this in France, is quite rare for a head of government to become more popular after they come into power. And so yeah, so there's been no real opposition that has been successfully mounted at the top, but also no real opposition from the bottom. Like I think when we've seen this wave of far right leaders come into power, we have seen in many countries the fact that there are kind of like these mass civil society protests that come afterwards. And all of them with like their different nuances and their different elements of radicality, but there hasn't even been, even in the least radical sense, if we look at like Trump being elected in 2016 and there were these big waves of women marches and stuff like that, there's no equivalent of that has happened in Italy in the past 3 years. And again, maybe in the discussion, I won't kind of like go down a rabbit hole of Italian politics right away. So we can come back to it in the discussion to why. Um, but so what's happened now is that on the 22nd of September, there was a general strike in Italy, where over 1 million people were on strike, or at least were protesting, and with a significant stoppages in transport, in the education sector, in ports, and with kind of massive protests all over Italy, the likes of which we haven't seen since 2001 or 2003. So 2001 was the G8 summit in Genova, where there were massive protests there. In 2003 were the mobilizations against the war in Iraq, where again there were big protests. But I mean, basically, it's been 20 to 25 years where we haven't seen protests of this size. And so these kind of like the spark that started all of this came from the Dockers Union in Genova, which is if I'm not wrong, the biggest port in Italy. It's in the northwest of Italy. And the Dockers Union had one of its members, one of its leaders, on one of the flotillas that was heading towards the Gaza Strip in recent weeks. And so when Jose, this union leader, left to go on the flotilla, the Dockers Union gave like a public promise or a public threat that if the flotilla was stopped, arrested, attacked, they would block the country. This was their term. We blocchiamo tutto. We'll block everything. And so they actually didn't wait for the flotilla to be arrested to do this. And on the 22nd of September, they launched this general strike. And I think we were all surprised to see how much it was. How much it was followed, basically. I think we've seen union leaders in the past promise to block everything, and then actually the day of, it's not quite the reality. And so to me, like the one kind of element of maybe analysis here that I'll put in is the fact that, mm, for me, like here we see basically like how there's kind of like this underlying and simmering anger and revolt about what's happening in Palestine and the genocide of the Palestinian people, that hadn't found a way to fully express itself in Italy. In Italy, much like in France, by the way, there hadn't been massive protests like we saw in London, or elsewhere in the world, in the 2 years of this genocide. And yet, kind of like from one day to the next, everyone comes out on the streets. And so I think that it is kind of like all this kind of like simmering and bubbling of anger about the genocide of the Palestinian people that finds a way that to express itself around basically this promise of the dockers of we'll block everything, and we actually have the power to block everything because we're the ones who make the country run. I mean, when you look at kind of like the statistics of how much goes through the different ports in Italy, you see how much it's a kind of logistical center point of the Mediterranean, and notably a logistical center point for the shipment of weapons to the state of Israel. And so this promise, and so yeah, so it's kind of like everyone's seeing that there's a concrete way to 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 act on what's happening in Palestine. And so this was on the 22nd of September. And basically, I think there's like another element here that's important to say, where it's the union that launched this call is actually a very, very small union. I don't know much about British trade unionism, so I don't know what the equivalent is, but it's a small left-wing union that basically emerges couple of decades ago, in opposition to the big historic center left union, which is called the CGL, the CGIL. And the CGIL basically has adopted over the past decades a strategy of complete collaboration with the government and with Italian business, in the sense where, in Italy, there are kind of very few national labor laws, and everything is negotiated branch by branch. For example, Italy doesn't have a minimum wage. The minimum wages in Italy are set branch by branch, and it is unions and industry that negotiate what the minimum wage in each branch should be. And so this huge trade union, basically for the past 20 years, has embraced a strategy of just pure and failing negotiations, where Italian standards of living have decreased, where a lot of social protections have been eroded. In Italy, wages used to be matched to inflation. So if inflation was 2%, your wage would rise by 2%. The Italian working class has lost that in recent years. And so this is the main union who has mobilized very little around Palestine. They had called for protests, calling for peace on weekends, but rarely were strikes used as a means of action on this question. And so, in this context, this smaller, more radical, more combative left-wing union called for this strike on the 22nd of September. In the run-up to that, to kind of try to save face, stop me if any of this like isn't clear because it's a bit going in all the senses. But in the run-up to this, the big union, the CGIL, kind of to save face, called for a strike a few days earlier on the 19th of September, which no one followed. I mean, it was very low levels of strike. And everyone instead went out and went on strike on the 22nd of September. So in this context of post 22nd of September, basically the big crisis emerged within the CGIL, where they where they realized that their base was actually demanding more and more left wing than their leadership on the question of Palestine, and asking for strikes, asking for mobilizations, and seeing that there was a smaller left wing union that was actually responding to that. And so there's an interesting article in an Italian newspaper that that has sources within leadership of the CGIL, which was saying that they started getting a bunch of calls and emails in the days after, of people threatening to give in their union card to stop paying their dues if they didn't mobilize on Palestine, because kind of like the whole charade of unions can't mobilize on Palestine was, exposed as being bullshit by the mobilization of the smaller union, the USB. Um, and so after that, basically the CGIL accepted to call for a common day of strike with the smaller union, and kind of behind the smaller union, the USB. And so this was like a first big victory of the movement. And so just to finish up on the chronology of this, basically the 22nd of September happens. This kind of historic deal is made between these two unions, which is something that we see very rarely in Italy, especially between these two kinds of unions. There's one combative union on one hand and one much less combative union on the other hand, which usually never do common dates of mobilization. And so they agreed to this. And then in the days after that, and this is when I was in Italy, there's an international conference called by the workers in Italy, with all port workers from Europe and especially from the Mediterranean. So there were also workers from Morocco, from Turkey, and such, to coordinate actions all over Europe to basically stop the shipment of arms to Israel, and to stop the shipment of arms in general and combat against this kind of pro-war feeling and this increased militarization we are seeing. And so this was after the 22nd of September, and after that there were two other big days of mobilizations, which were the 3rd and the 4th of October, where this was basically in the aftermath of the flotilla being the members of the flotilla being kidnapped by the state of Israel, and where basically on the 3rd of October, there were 2 million people who went on strike and protested all over Italy, once again with huge numbers in certain sectors, transports being blocked, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the 4th of Italy, there was a big national. On the 4th of October, there was a big national demonstration in Rome, where 1 million people took over went out on the streets, and yeah. So this is kind of like the big chronology of events.